2 hours later.
Now we've got that out of the way, let's get on with putting these parts on the bike. Now, why did I choose Ultegra Mechanical? Because my other bikes have got Ultegra Mechanical. So we're not interested in how the parts perform, we're interested in how this frame performs, or moreover, the bike as a whole. So let's have a brief look at what's actually in the box when you order a group set. So inside the box you get the left-hand crank and your cranks there, some instructions in different languages, and your preload cap, which goes of course in the left-hand crank there. So the little instructions here which are on the crank just basically tells you the right torque, 12 to 14 newton meters, and then after 100 kilometers or thereabouts, make sure that these bolts are still the right torque. And on the back of the crank you should have just a smear of grease. Sometimes I've got it on the axle as well, just a little bit. Other than that, it's clean. And on these bolts on the left hand crank there's grease on that thread, so that's good, you don't have to worry about greasing that. Onto the levers now. Then you've got your 2 levers. Now inside your box you have a whole lot of gear here, so it includes your hydraulic mineral oil, left and right, or back and front, gear cable, some important gear bits here, hydraulic funnel adapter, more hydraulic lead blocks, and your olives and the barbs. Then you've got gear and brake outers, and then some instructions. Now, gear inners aren't shiny like some. These are Teflon impregnated, plastic coated. Rear derailleur. Cut this plastic off. Okay, there's your rear derailleur, very nice. And of course you get your final bend on the outer there. Front derailleur, nothing special, there it is. And no bits, just the instructions. Now don't pull this red tab off, leave that on for the time being. Your brakes, no difference, they're both the same, front and one's front, one's rear. So you've got your brake caliper there with the bleed block inserted, don't take that out yet. And then underneath you do have some bits. So you've got your brake blocks and the spring and your 2 mounting bolts and a little bleed block there. Right. Starting with the levers, this is your rear, that's your front. So peel back your lever hood from the back and that'll expose the head of the bolt. Allen key 5mm, which clamps onto your handlebars. So undo that a bit. Slide your lever onto your bar to approximately the spot where you want it. On this bar, this yo-yo bar, there's a knurled rough bit, so it grips a bit better. So approximately there, and just nip it up so it's firm, not tight yet. And do the same with the other side. Now you need the rear caliper, the 2 bolts and a 4mm Allen key. So the rear caliper mount should be nice and clean and no excess paint build up. So the caliper mounts that way, the writing on the outside, so there's your 2 bolt holes and it fits like that. So the bleed port faces upwards. Make sure the surface underneath where the bolts go through is good as well. And at the end of the bolt there is some thread locker on there. So just put that through. You can start it with your fingers. The other one. Don't tighten the bolts all the way up yet, leave it a little bit loose because we've got to get your cable length right, so you might need to take your caliper off and shift it accordingly. So for your front caliper, again, make sure those mounting faces are nice and clean. Derailleur's done a nice job of machining them. And of course your writing on your caliper faces outwards, so that's your bleed port. and that's where your hose comes in there, your hydraulic hose. Now your mounting bolts are shorter than your rear ones, and they've still got some thread locker on, so just put the top one in. Top one first, and then the bottom one. Again, don't do the mounting bolts up too tight. Leave your caliper just a little bit loose, because you might need to take it off later on so you can get the length of your hydraulic hose correct. Take out your hydraulic brake bits, separate your brake box, you don't need them. And these are the parts that you're going to need. 4 your barbs, 4 olives, your 2 bolts for your handlebar, lever for your levers, and for your 2 for your calipers. So looking down top of your lever, this is the rear one, or the right hand side lever, your rear gear changer. So that's your port where your hydraulic cable goes, so you undo that. Now get a spare piece of hydraulic hose and just put it inside and put your thumb on the end, and you'll see that it goes in about up to where the lever hood is folded back here. So when you cut your hydraulic line here, you need to make sure you cut it there, not back here. So make sure you got your hose exactly right, exactly where you want it, and then just make the mark. Get your cutter and cut it on the mark. Now get one of the barbs and press it into the end of the hydraulic hose, nice and square, preferably with the right tool like this one. Now put on a nut with the thread facing outwards. And finally put on one of the olives. Now it's good practice to put a bit of grease on the olive. It'll help it slide and locate into the housing correctly and promotes a good seal. Gently push the hose backwards and insert the end of the hose into the lever body. And slide the olive and the nut down also. And with a spanner, tighten it up. Keep winding the nut in and you'll start to feel some resistance. That's the olive forming its seal. Keep going until the flange of the nut just comes flush with the lever body. And do exactly the same for the other hose to the lever. Now to the brake calipers, this is the rear one. Slide the hose to frame embedding guide onto the hose and click it into place. Gently pull the hose backwards so you can see it rise in the bottom bracket shell. Remove the stopper plug. Insert a dummy piece of hose and you can see it goes in around about 12 millimeters. Now pull on the hose and turn your handlebars at the same time. You'll notice that the hose shortens and lengthens. So hold your handlebars so that the hose is in its shortest position. Hold the hose level with the caliper and mark 12 millimeters in from the end of the insertion point of the caliper. And cut the hose on the line. And the procedure will be the same with all the hydraulic ends. Fit the barb, press the barb, then fit the nut, fit the olive and grease the olive. To help the hose get a square fit into the caliper housing, you can remove the caliper from the frame. Screw in the nut and tighten it up with the spanner. And rebolt the caliper back onto the frame. And it's exactly the same procedure for the front caliper, except you don't need to turn your handlebars to test the cable length. So that's your hydraulic brake lines all in, and we'll put the fluid in later on. So now it's a good time to clear your bench again, and we'll do the gears. Measure how far into the lever body the outer casing goes before it stops, 8 millimeters. So you can get your gear cable and make sure it's comfortable, nice bend, not any sharp, no sharp bends, and you can mark it. Cutting the outer housing usually crushes the Teflon inner a bit, so use the sharp pointy tool to make the opening better. Then put on the outer housing end cap. Get the shorter of your gear inner cable. Looking at your front shift lever from the outside the handlebar, you should be able to see straight through to the other side. If you can't, toggle the downshift lever until you can see through. Insert your inner cable through the outside of the lever and it comes straight through to the inside. Thread that gear inner end straight into the outer housing and push in only about 2 feet or 60 centimeters of the inner wire. Once again, turn the handlebars until you feel the outer housing being pulled shorter. Mark the housing whilst it's in its shortest length 5 mm from the opening of the housing stopper. Now go back to the lever and feed the rest of the inner cable through the housing. And then tuck the housing with its stopper into the lever body. And now for your front derailleur. Remove the mounting bolt and grease the thread. Now mount your front derailleur to the braze-on. Well, it's not really a braze-on because that's for a steel frame, so here's the carbon frame. We'll call it a bolt-on hanger. And just for the time being, mount it to the top of the hanger. Now slide on a housing stopper. Then thread the inner wire through the frame stopper. Here you can see it coming up through the bottom bracket shell. Now you may wish to use that outer housing that you cut off, slide it into the hole where the inner wire is going to come through for the front derailleur in the frame there, and that will help guide the inner wire from the bottom bracket up through into that hole near the front derailleur. As you keep pulling the inner wire through, bend the outer housing and then place the end of it into the frame housing stopper. Using the little rubber grommet that comes with the frame, punch a hole in the middle of it and thread the inner wire into the grommet and then fix the grommet into the frame in place like so. Now lift this plastic cap off of your front derailleur to reveal the anchor bolt. Undo the anchor bolt with a 4mm Allen key and slide the inner cable underneath the washer. Thread the inner cable through the cap and hook the inner wire under this front lip and replace the cap. Now we'll come back and finish the front derailleur, but first we'll do the rear derailleur. The process is pretty much the same as your front derailleur lever. Locate the hole, make sure you can see through to the other side of that hole and then thread the inner wire through. You may need to use a small flathead screwdriver to help you locate the head of the wire into the recess. Mark the same 8mm difference on the housing and then cut on that line. Then use the pointy tool to open the Teflon sheath at the end. Put an end cap on that outer cable. Then with the cleanest rag you have, wipe the inner cable a couple of times at least so there's no dirt or moisture on it whatsoever. The rear gear cable is the longest, so anything that causes friction between the inner wire and the Teflon sheath of the outer will likely interfere with accuracy of gear changing of your rear derailleur. Now thread and push that inner wire into the outer, not all the way yet, only in about 2 feet. Now at the rear derailleur end of the frame, get that rubber grommet that comes with the frame, put that on the outer cable and manipulate that into place in the frame. Once again, turn your handlebars so that the outer cable at the rear pulls in a little bit. Then measure the outer to the barrel adjuster and of course add that 8mm again. Cut at the right spot and then using that pointy tool make sure the end of that Teflon sheath is clear and round. Now slide the rest of the inner cable all the way through and then place the outer cable into the lever. Put an outer cable stopper onto the rear outer, thread the inner cable through the barrel adjuster and carefully bend and place the outer into the barrel adjuster. Undo the anchor bolt a couple of turns and then slide the inner cable under the washer. Whilst you're pulling on the inner cable, just firm up that anchor bolt. Then with the gear lever, go through all your gears from top to bottom. Okay, so we've got the brakes and the gears on, and now the crankset. But before that, of course, it needs a bottom bracket. So that's next, our bottom bracket, BB86. So I'm using a quay bottom bracket. It has an aluminium shell, ceramic bearings, and most important of all, it has a twist screw-in fit. Now on the interfaces themselves, you can see there's rubber O-rings here on both sides. That's fair enough. But what we're going to do is clean these edges with isopropyl alcohol, and then we're going to add some of our rubber glue on there. Make sure the bottom bracket shell is nice and clean as well. I've been using Brake Quiet for quite a few years now, and I find it brilliant for stopping creaks and preventing moisture ingress. Using a small brush, painted on the interfacing surfaces of your bottom bracket, both sides of course. And also on the interfacing surfaces of the bottom bracket shell on the frame. So the thread here, we're going to use boating grease. Why boating grease? Because it's thick and prevents water ingress the best way. So a nice thick amount of grease on that thread. And some on the inside here. Tool we're going to use is this one. It's quite cheap to buy if you want to get one yourself. Fits 4 different styles of bottom brackets, including of course the 386 Evo. So fit both the sides of the bottom bracket into the frame shell. Make sure you get the right on the right side and the left on the left. Press them in and the glue should hold them in place. Now I turn the frame upside down on the floor, a soft floor of course. This way you get better purchase with the tool on the bottom bracket, and you also get a more accurate view of how even the bottom bracket is going into the frame. Now remembering that there's no thread in your frame shell, in the bottom bracket shell, so as you thread the bottom bracket in, it's only got its own thread, and that's a right hand thread, so both sides will be right handed as you screw them in. Once your bottom bracket's firmly in, there'll be a lot of this goo on the outside, so clean it up with isopropyl alcohol. Check that the bottom bracket is all the way in onto the bottom bracket shell edges with no gaps and even all the way around. Check that the bearings run nice and smoothly on both sides, and then you're ready to install your crankset. Once again, boating grease and apply it to where the bearings sit on the axle. And a small amount on the inner race of your bottom bracket bearings. Don't put any grease on this inner surface of the spider because it only attracts dirt, so leave it nice and clean. Now just insert the cranks. Left hand side of the crank axle, boating grease here as well, a nice even coat. Then inside the left hand crank arm, a nice even coat as well. Completely remove the outer bolt and flip up the locating washer. Push the left hand crank on and flip down the locating washer and reinsert the bolt. Notice that the bolt has some grease already on the thread from the factory. Well, we've got a visitor here. What are you doing, Magpie? What's he doing in the workshop? You want some yummies? Come to check us out. Oh well. Now get the preload cap. Just put a little bit of grease on. I'm using just a light grease this time. Then with the tool, put that in. Now with your preload, the cranks spin, and you tighten up your preload until it doesn't quite spin as good. There we go. And back it off a fraction. Now what I like to do, take the tool out, give it a hit on the right hand side and then on the left, just to make sure everything's settling in right, and do the same thing, just back it off, look for the spin and go till it doesn't quite spin as good. There we go. So just back it off a fraction more, mate. Here we go. Just find a nice balance. That'll do, that's pretty good. Now tighten up the pinch bolts, note your torque, 12 to 14 Newton meters for Shimano. Going to do that. And then you tighten up your bolts little bit by little bit each side. To me, 12 to 14 Newton meters means 13. I'm just being pedantic. Okay, that's that. And that's that one. Of course, you know what causes your slowing down of your crank instead of it spinning and spinning and spinning is caused mostly the seals and of course the lubricant they use in there, but that's another story. Well, we're certainly getting there now with the assembly of this bike. Hopefully you're getting some handy hints, if not some inspiration to build your own bike. It's really not that difficult, it's not rocket science. These days, all you really need to do is pay attention to tolerances more than anything, and that's done with a torque wrench anyhow. Everything else fits together fairly well. Just take your time and you're right. You know, there's no greater sense of satisfaction in building your own bike. It's great, and then you ride it. And also, you'll get to know your bike inside out, upside down. So if anything needs attention, you'll know exactly where to look and how to fix it up. So now we've still got the R6. Here it is. I've just taken the wheels off from the chain and put it on the R12, and they're interchangeable. So if I want to ride the R6 again, just take the wheels off, whack the chain on, and in 2 minutes I'm on the road with this bike. So that's a good thing as well, interchangeable. Now all we need to do now to finish off the R12, and that'll be in the next video, is to put fluid in the brakes and set them up, set up the gears, put the pedals on, put the seat post in with the clamp system here, the seat on, bar tape, bottle cages, and of course measure it up to fit me in particular because I'll be riding the bike. Anyhow, all that in the next video, so we'll see you there.